There are horrors we see coming, and horrors that live quietly above us, behind locked doors, seeping down through the walls. Tonight's story is based on terrifying true events, a soft-spoken neighbor, a foul smell in the drains, and a truth far worse than anyone imagined. Set in 1982, London. This is the horror beneath flat 195. They say London's an old city, and old cities have old smells. I used to believe that. Thought it explained the occasional stink that rose from the drains or wafted in from the alley behind the building. But that was before the winter of 1982, before flat. 195 became something else entirely. Before I realized some smells aren't part of the city. They're warnings. It started in early February, I remember, because the cold had crept in deeper than usual that week, and my little electric heater barely made a dent. I was sitting on the floor sorting through some records near the radiator when a strange odor reached me. Sharp, metallic, and sour. It was faint, like the ghost of a scent, but enough to wrinkle my nose. I assumed it was the garbage bins in the alley again. I sprayed some air freshener and forgot about it. The next day it returned, stronger this time, and not just in the lounge, but in the hallway, in the bathroom, in the kitchen, like it was following me. I opened the window and leaned out. Cold wind hit my face, but the air was clean. Whatever it wasn't coming from outside. I lived on the second floor. Above me in the top flat was Dennis. I didn't know much about him, just the usual polite hellos on the stairs. He was tall, pale, always in a neat suit and overcoat. He carried himself like a man who liked rules and routines. He smelled faintly of aftershave and boiled mince. I remember that clearly. A quiet bloke, friendly enough. Never any loud music or arguments. Never brought anyone round that I noticed. By the third day, the smell was unbearable. I tried bleach down the drains, opened every window I had, even pulled out the old baking soda trick from my mum. Nothing worked. It was like it had seeped into the wallpaper. That night I had a strange dream. Something about hands reaching up from a drain, slick and black, trying to pull me under. I woke in a sweat and went to the bathroom to splash water on my face. That's when I heard it. Thud. Then again. Thud. Thud. Heavy, muffled like someone dragging furniture across the floor upstairs. It was 2:17 a.m. I remember checking the clock. I stood in my bathroom, listening. Then it stopped. Silence except for the low hum of the pipes. The next morning I passed Dennis on the stairs. He looked more disheveled than usual. Hair uncombed, tie slightly crooked, eyes shadowed and tired. Still, he smiled that strange, close-lipped smile of his. "Morning," I said, trying to sound casual. "Everything all right up there? Heard some banging around last night?" He nodded quickly. "Ah, yes, sorry about that. My dog knocked over a chair, got a bit of a fright." He gave a chuckle that didn't touch his eyes. Dog. That stuck with me. I'd never seen a dog, never heard barking or claws on the tile or anything to suggest an animal lived up there. I almost asked what kind of dog, but he was already brushing past me, his boots echoing down the stairs. Later that evening, I ran into Mrs. Fenn from the ground floor. She was in her 70s, hard of hearing, and always wore thick perfume that lingered long after she'd left the room. But even she'd noticed it. "That awful smell in the halls," she said, covering her nose with a handkerchief. "Something must have died in the walls. We should ring the landlord." I agreed, though I doubted the landlord would do anything quickly. Mr. Kirkwood barely fixed the heating, let alone went hunting for dead animals in the vents. Still, I called, left a message. That night, the thudding started again. Not loud, but steady. Not furniture this time. something softer, wet even. I pressed my ear to the ceiling and held my breath. A faint humming. No, not humming. Talking. Dennis was talking to someone, but the words were muffled like he was deep underwater. I backed away. Maybe he really did have a dog. Maybe he had company. Maybe I was just letting the smell and the sleepless nights get to me. But something about it didn't feel right. That smell. It wasn't like anything I'd ever known. Rot, decay, and something sweet underneath like old fruit left in a closed box. A week later, the pipes would start to clog. But for now, it was just the smell. The smell and the sound of something shifting upstairs in the dark. The smell didn't leave. If anything, it got worse. By the end of the week, it had transformed from a nuisance into something unbearable. I stopped cooking entirely. Nothing I made could mask it. My kettle now shared the countertop with a bottle of industrial-strength disinfectant, and I found myself scrubbing the drains with a toothbrush at midnight like a man possessed. But it wasn't just the smell anymore. The water started acting strange. First, the kitchen sink. It gurgled after every use. Loud, wet gasps echoing through the pipes. Then came the slow drainage. I'd pour out a bowl of leftover soup and it would sit there, swirling in a brown spiral that refused to vanish. Eventually it would disappear with a slurp, like the building had swallowed it reluctantly. Then it spread to the bathroom. My shower pooled with grey water. I took to standing in it, ankle deep, bracing myself as hair and bits of black sludge floated around my toes. I left a note with the landlord. No response. I knocked on Mrs. Fenn's door downstairs. She was having the same issue. Bloody ancient plumbing, she muttered. Told Kirkwood it needed replacing years ago. He just sent a man with a plunger and a bad attitude. We laughed, but something about the way she looked toward the ceiling told me she had her own suspicions. When I asked if she'd spoken to Dennis, she frowned. Number. Haven't seen him in days. I had. He passed me 2 mornings ago in the stairwell, dressed in his usual coat and scarf. But something about his face was off, paler than normal. His eyes glassy like he'd been crying. He didn't say hello, just nodded and walked past me, stiffly, like his joints ached. Saturday morning I was brushing my teeth when I noticed a slick black ring around the base of the drain. I turned the tap off and stared. The water receded slowly, revealing streaks of something dark and gelatinous clinging to the porcelain. It wasn't hair. It wasn't dirt. It looked organic. I ran the hot tap, poured bleach again, and gagged as the fumes mixed with whatever was already down there. I opened the window and leaned out, just in time to see a pair of council workers entering the building, both in overalls carrying drain rods and a toolbox. Finally. They spent the next hour clanging around outside. I poked my head out to eavesdrop. One of them, tall bloke with a moustache, was shouting toward the back of the property. Drain's completely blocked. Something's packed in tight. Could be animal fat, maybe a build-up from upstairs. I froze. Fat? My flat went quiet for a moment. The kind of silence that makes your heartbeat sound like a drum. Then a sound echoed up from the pipes, a low, glugging groan, like something thick and heavy shifting under the floorboards. That evening, I saw Dennis again. He was returning from the shops with a bag of potatoes and a newspaper tucked under his arm. I hesitated before speaking. They're checking the drains, some kind of blockage, I said. He looked up, startled, as if I'd caught him mid-thought. Then that same faint smile spread across his face. Ah, yes, he said, voice flat. They knocked on my door. I told them I hadn't noticed anything. Strange, isn't it? Strange didn't begin to cover it. He smelled stronger than usual, not like his cologne, but like something damp and earthy clinging to him. I watched as he unlocked his flat and disappeared inside without another word. Later, that night, the stench seeped into my dreams. I was standing in a corridor that pulsed with breathing walls dripping with moisture. Something was knocking behind a door. A steady thump, thump, thump. When I opened it, all I saw was water rushing toward me, black and warm. I woke up gasping, my sheets damp with sweat. From above I heard footsteps, slow, measured, then the creak of something heavy being dragged across the floor. No voices this time, no music, just that wet groan from the pipes again. Something was clogging the drain, and I was starting to think it wasn't fat. By mid-February, the building began to feel sick. The smell had saturated everything, the carpet, the curtains, the very air itself. No matter how many candles I lit or how often I aired out the flat, it always returned, pungent, sweet, and thick, like rotting meat with something chemical buried underneath. I took to sleeping with a scarf wrapped around my face and my windows cracked open, even in the dead of night. Then came the noises. It started subtly. I'd be brushing my teeth or pouring tea and hear it. A faint tapping in the walls, irregular but persistent, like someone gently knocking from inside. It moved sometimes. One night it came from behind the bathroom tiles, the next from under the floorboards in the hallway. It wasn't loud enough to be alarming, just wrong. Wrong in a way that made your chest tighten. I wasn't the only one hearing things. Mrs. Fenn knocked on my door one morning, her hair in curlers, face pale. "Do you hear it too?" she asked. "Sounds like someone's crawling inside the bloody walls." I nodded, too tired to pretend anymore. "And the drains?" She just made a face and waved her hand in front of her nose. Whatever was causing it, the landlord still hadn't addressed it. He claimed the council was handling it now, said something about blocked mains and fat deposits. I didn't buy it. The stink wasn't just in the plumbing. It felt like it was breathing out from the building itself. That same day I saw Dennis again, for the first time in nearly a week. He was coming back from the shops, carrying a single bag and walking slowly, like his limbs hurt. He looked thinner, hollow. His skin had a grey tint and his eyes seemed sunken like they'd retreated into his skull. But when he saw me, he still gave that same eerie, too calm smile. "Been feeling a bit rough," he muttered before I could even ask. "Staying in, mostly." I asked if he'd had trouble with the drains. He blinked, slow and deliberate. "No," he said, voice flat. "No problems here." Then he turned and went inside. I stood there watching his door until it clicked shut, and wondered if I'd imagined the dark smears on his cuff. That night, the tapping came back, this time sharper, more deliberate. I followed it, pressing my ear to the living room wall. For a moment I swore I could hear breathing. Not from my flat, not from next door, from inside the wall. Then silence. A few hours later I went to take the rubbish out and ran into Martin, the kid from the top floor. He looked shaken. "You seen Lisa?" he asked. "Flat 10. I haven't heard her telly in days. Her boyfriend's been ringing the bell every night." I hadn't seen her either. Lisa was a sweet girl in her 20s who worked mornings at a bakery near Camden. She always wore bright scarves and kept her music low. I realized, as he asked, that I hadn't heard her footsteps above me in days. Her post had begun piling up too. Martin said he'd called the police. The officers showed up the next morning. Plain clothes types in trench coats. They went door to door, asked a few questions. I told them what I knew, that Lisa hadn't been around, and that the smell in the building was growing unbearable. I mentioned the noise, the sludge, the way Dennis had been acting odd. They thanked me and moved on. I watched them knock on his door. He let them in. They were only inside for 10 minutes. When they came out, they looked unchanged, professional. They nodded and jotted things in their little pads. Dennis stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. The next night, I didn't sleep, not because of the noise, because of what I saw. At around 1:30 a.m., I heard the pipes hiss again. Water burbled up from my kitchen sink and spat something thick and stringy into the basin. When I turned on the light, I froze. There, lying half submerged in the drain water, was something pale and soft. I reached for a spoon and nudged it. It was a small strip of skin. Human skin. I dropped the spoon and backed away, bile rising in my throat. I stood in the kitchen, trembling, staring at the drain. The tapping in the wall started again. I didn't call the police. I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid of being wrong. Maybe I didn't want to be right. The strip of skin from the drain was gone the next morning. I flushed it out with boiling water and bleach until the smell made my eyes sting. For hours afterward, I sat on the floor, gripping my knees, listening to every creak in the pipes like they were breathing. It was Sunday, and the council was due to return Monday to inspect the pipework again. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. I went upstairs and knocked on Dennis's door. This time it took longer for him to answer. A full minute. I almost walked away. When the door opened, the heat hit me first. Thick, humid air that smelled like chemicals, and meat gone bad. Dennis stood there in a brown cardigan, no shirt underneath. His chest was pale, nearly hairless. He looked thin. His collarbone jutted out like a coat hanger. He didn't smile. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice flat. I faltered. The smell, I had to ask. It's coming from somewhere. And the drains, something's wrong. You know it. He stared at me for a moment, then opened the door wider. "Come in if you like," he said, turning his back to me. "You can see for yourself." I hesitated, then stepped inside. His flat was dim, curtains drawn, the radiator cranked high. A heavy floral air freshener hung in the air, trying and failing to smother something far worse. I noticed towels along the base of the bathroom door. A large black bin liner sat beside the sofa. Several ceramic dog figurines lined the mantel, dusty, perfectly placed. "I've had no issues," he said, walking into the kitchen. "No more than usual." I stood by the hallway, not daring to move farther in. The carpet beneath my feet felt damp. "Have you seen Lisa?" I asked cautiously. "She's been missing." He didn't turn around. "People come and go," he said softly. "Some people don't want to be found." There was a long pause. The silence inside his flat felt unnatural, thick, pressurized. I took a step back. "Right, well, just checking in." Dennis turned then, slowly, and stared at me with the calm of a man who'd already made peace with something. "Let the council know if you have a complaint," he said. "They're the ones who fix things. Not me." I left quickly. Back in my own flat, I locked the door and leaned against it, breath shaking. Something in that flat was deeply wrong. The heat, the smell, the towels, the way he spoke like he wasn't really there anymore. The next morning, 2 council workers arrived to inspect the main drain. I heard them talking outside my window. "Jesus Christ," one of them muttered. "You smell that? It's coming from inside the building." They gained access to the main crawl space behind the units. I heard metal scraping, boots stomping, something heavy shifting. Then one of them swore loudly and banged on my neighbor's door. "Flat 23, top floor." Minutes later I heard a commotion, shouting, a door being forced open. Then silence. Then the sirens. I stepped into the hallway. Other neighbors had gathered, Mrs. Fenn in her robe, Martin from upstairs, even the landlord, pale as chalk. A police van pulled up. Then another. Officers flooded the stairwell. And then, a sound I'll never forget. A dry retching followed by a scream. The kind of scream that breaks something inside the person letting it out. They carried the first body bag out around noon. Then another. And another. The sun was high, but the sky felt heavy, like the whole building had been hiding a secret under its skin, and it had finally split open. Dennis Nilsen was escorted out in handcuffs. He didn't resist. He didn't look at anyone, just kept his head low, as if he was embarrassed. The officer leading him glanced at the crowd and shook his head slowly. "You've all been sleeping over a graveyard," he muttered. And then they were gone. That night the building was silent. No more banging, no more smells. Just silence. And I realized something terrifying. Dennis hadn't been hiding bodies. He'd been living with them. They kept the building sealed off for a week after the arrest. Police tape stretched across the stairwell like a warning to anyone stupid enough to step over it. The officers came and went in silence, carrying boxes, evidence bags, sometimes cameras. A few neighbors gave interviews. I didn't. I stayed inside my flat with the windows shut and the curtains drawn, watching shadows move up and down the hallway like ghosts. But the worst came after they left. The details, they always come after. A reporter from the Evening Standard knocked one morning. She offered me £50 if I'd talk. I didn't, but I read the article the next day. Apparently the drains were blocked with human remains, chunks of flesh, bits of bone, flushed down the pipes like garbage. When the council workers opened the main line, they found pieces caught in the bends. That's what the smell was. That's what had backed up into our sinks, soaked into the walls, and crept through our vents. He'd killed them. 12, maybe more. Strangled them, bathed them, lived with them, talked to them. The bags in his wardrobe weren't laundry. They were bodies. He cooked near them, slept in the same room, watched television while they decomposed beneath his floorboards. The police said it was flat 23, but I already knew that. I'd stood in that flat. I'd breathed that air. I'd looked into his eyes and tried to reason with what lived behind them. A week later, the landlord came by, said they were gutting the place, removing floorboards, bleaching the walls, replacing plumbing. Asked if I wanted to stay. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked down to the pub and sat there with a pint in front of me until it went warm. People talked. They always do. They said things like, "You never really know someone," or "He seemed so normal." But that wasn't what haunted me. What haunted me was how close I'd come to brushing shoulders with it, evil in its most ordinary skin. Just a man in a cardigan with bags of potatoes and a blank stare. He'd lived over me for months. Sometimes I wonder about the nights I heard thuds and thought it was furniture, or the nights I smelled burning and thought it was his cooking, or the sludge that stained my sink and what it might have been. You try to rationalize it. You say, "Well, I couldn't have known," or "It wasn't my business." But in the quiet moments when the pipes gurgle late at night or the air feels too still, you wonder, could I have stopped it? The council sent a letter weeks later, saying the unit had been remediated and was once again suitable for tenancy. I didn't even finish reading it. I tossed it in the bin. I moved out in April, packed what I could fit in 2 boxes and left the rest. I didn't even say goodbye to Mrs. Fenn or Martin. Some places stain you. Some walls carry too much. On my last day, I stood outside and looked up. Flat 23's curtains were drawn, same as always, the window slightly cracked, as if someone was still inside, letting the smell out. Dennis Nilsen was eventually arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder. after years of going unnoticed. He flushed parts of his victims down the drains and lived among their remains in silence. But the truth didn't stay buried. It rose up through the pipes, into the lives of everyone around him. Evil doesn't always knock on your door. Sometimes it lives right above it. If you enjoyed our story this evening, let us know by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Until next time, good night.